And I think we're ready to introduce now Dr. Sara Wilmes. And Dr. Wilmes is coming to us from University of Luxembourg, where it's quite early, now 7:30, 8 a.m. Getting later, woohoo. Dr. Wilmes is a researcher with the SciTech Center project, and she's working to support collaborative teacher education and professional development. And she's doing research around science education in multilingual contexts, and specifically using postmodern research methodologies to explore intersections between science learning and diverse communicative resource use. So please welcome Dr. Wilmes.
Yay. Thank you, Dr. Martin. So first, I would like to say thank you very much for having me. I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to you from Luxembourg, but here in this global context. And just as Dr. Martin had said, what I'd like to do today is share about some of the work that we're doing with teachers, also in the context of science education, as with Dr. Martin. But I hope that it speaks to some global concerns and ways that we all think about, or that others may think about approaching their work with teachers and teacher education, specifically in contexts where perhaps there's great diversity in the people that we're working with and the classrooms that we're working in, which of course is the case for all of us in different ways. So with that being said, I'll start sharing the screen. Okay, so what I'd like to talk about today is a mixture of some projects along the theme of who are we and why are we teaching this way? In what I will present to you today, this question really leads the way, as I'll share with you ways that we've been working to build critical and reflective spaces within primary science teacher education, within teacher professional learning, and within research in our work here in Luxembourg and with the University of Luxembourg. And so this is how I've structured what I'll share with you today. And why am I saying this is just to give you a bigger picture of the whole story that I'll share with you, because there's many different pieces. So I wanted to give you a kind of map of where we're headed. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Luxembourg's super diverse context. I know that some of you, we know each other well, and you know this context, but it's shifting. And so I think it's important to share about it. Next, I'll tell you about our work at the SciTech Center and our work with education research and how we try to stay very close to the work of teachers in classrooms. And lastly, I'll share with you two projects where we did critical reflexive research within teacher education and professionalization, with the hopes, as Dr. Martin said, that this work from my local context has some commonalities or can inform some questions that are of interest for all of us. And so first, where am I right now on this day coming to you via the internet? Do you see this little red dot there? That's us, Luxembourg in Western Europe. And if we zoom in a bit more, here we are, this green country, and we're landlocked, meaning we're nestled between Belgium, Germany, and France. We have three national languages: Luxembourgish, French, and German. And depending on where you are in the country, you'll hear different combinations of those. We also have a very high percentage of our population that are not Luxembourg citizens. And we also have a very high level of migration for our residents, but on a daily basis. So 40% of the workforce comes to Luxembourg each day to work. We know this changed a little bit with COVID, but interesting to note, all of those regulations allowing homework are being canceled. And so now everybody's driving and flying back and forth to work again, which is a different discussion. But what does this mean then in our primary schools? And what does this mean and how is this diversity reflected in our students? So here's a picture I'll explain to you from data that was taken just a year ago. This shows the percentage of our students that are Luxembourgish or another category. And so on the far left, you'll see a very high number of students are born in Luxembourg, but the split is about 50-50 for those having Luxembourg citizenship. But the really important part for our work is on the right. The first language spoken at home, very high percentage, it's not Luxembourgish. And this has very important implications for how we're working with teachers who are teaching these students. Here's another bit of information, and so I'll explain what this one means. If we look from the bottom up and we consider the light blue band, you'll see that the first languages spoken at home are increasingly not Luxembourgish. And why is this important? Because we are primarily schooling our children first in Luxembourgish. It's an important tension because speaking Luxembourgish is also very important for national identity. And as a small nation, this is something that we're always wrestling with. How important is Luxembourgish in our primary school curriculum? So let's talk about what's happening in schools a bit. In our primary schools, the national curriculum is trilingual. So you'll see here in the first year of schooling, when children are 3, they start in Luxembourgish, and this continues on as the language of organization. Next, students begin literacy instruction in German, and now this is new, and also in French from the age of 5. So students are learning German, French, and Luxembourgish all the way up through until secondary school. What is happening, though, is that we have a trilingual curriculum, yet the languages are treated very separately, meaning you use French during French subject and nowhere else. You don't learn science through French, even if French is the language that you speak out of school. So school is making the languages very separate and very discrete. Okay, so this is important in our work with teachers. And this is what we're trying to get at in discussion, because we know that this does not reflect how students and how we use languages outside of school contexts. As Dr. Martin shared, my research focuses on science education in primary schools. So I'd like to share with you a little bit about the context here. We have a competency-based national curriculum that was adopted in 2011, which was great, but yet we have no newly adapted teaching materials, which makes it a bit challenging. Second, science instruction is 7% of instructional time in primary school. With language literacy, so that German and French that I explained, makes up 46% of children's time in school. In comparison, if we look at Germany, science is 10% of instructional time, and language literacy is 25% of the time. So you can see our children are spending a lot of time learning languages and not so much time learning science. Another really important point is third, almost all of our students then are learning science and learning subjects through a language they're not speaking outside of school, or not one of what we might say is one of their first languages. So we have this very super diverse context and languages layering upon each other in different ways, as with many global contexts. And this puts our teachers and our schools in a very interesting position. I wanted to share an example with you. So here is some information from a class we worked with, and you'll see there are 6 students listed here. The black box shows the languages that they're working with in schools, being Luxembourgish, German, and French. But when we interviewed these students, which I think shows the fabulous diversity, the X's denote the languages that children self-identified as using outside of school. So this is 1/3 of one class. And so you can see the diversity and how this might come into interesting situations in classrooms and for teachers. Okay, so now I'd like to just tell you very briefly about primary teachers in Luxembourg globally, or in general. There is a language test that's required to become a teacher. So you have to show that you're proficient in German and French, both writing and speaking. If you were not born in Luxembourg, you also have to prove that you are literate in Luxembourgish. So for example, for me, I am now a Luxembourg citizen. I was born and raised in the United States and then moved to Luxembourg and did my doctoral research here, and I'm a citizen, but I would never be able to pass those tests. So while I am trained as a primary school teacher, I could never enter a classroom here as a teacher. Also, then people are ranked based on these. So you can imagine that those who were born and raised here and who have succeeded in the system are those who are ranked at the top and get to choose which positions they select as a teacher. Now, to switch gears a bit, where am I working? So at the University of Luxembourg, I'm working at the SciTeach Center. Our director is Professor Christina Siri, many of you know. And we are an initiative where the Education Ministry and the university came together and said, we see this gap. And so our mission is to support sustainable primary science education and teaching. We are a multi-professional team. We're educators, sociologists, teachers, people with science background, people with language background. And together we co-develop, co-plan, and co-teach with teachers in this very diverse and complex environment. We offer professional development for teachers. We also are teaching university courses for bachelor students in the education department, and we are developing resources. So Dr. Martin had mentioned this about being able to find resources in the languages that you identify with that help you see yourself as a teacher. We're creating more and more of these from our context and with our teachers here, because quite honestly, there's not many available for Luxembourg. Okay, there's a picture of a teacher working at one of our workshops. We'll move on. It's important to say, what is our vision for science education? And you see here some of our students investigating, engaging in science practices. And this is the type of instruction we're talking about. Not the type of instruction where students are filling in worksheets about science, but they're actually seeing themselves as, I can do science, I am engaging in science. And it's this student-driven science inquiry that we would like to support in instruction. Just a little bit about the theoretical perspective of the work and the lens that I've used in the work I'll share with you. I come from a point of looking at the individual and collective dialectic and understanding that these cannot be separated out when we're analyzing our work with teachers and our work with students. And I do this purposely to allow myself a critical perspective of looking at who has power in these situations. How are we both influencing each other in the collective? And you'll see this running through the two studies that I will share with you next. And this individual collective dialectic theoretical perspective allows me to ask questions like you see here. So, who am I in this super diverse society? So who am I, Sarah? And how am I working with teachers as a researcher, as an educator, as a university professor? Which then has a direct influence on who are we within this super diverse society collectively? And how are we working with teachers together? So I think that looking at both of these is essential to our work. And it allows us to take our individual perspectives and draw ideas for the greater society and perhaps even globally. Or not. we can talk about that. And so now I'd like to share with you just briefly 2 studies that I drew upon this theoretical lens and that were conducted kind of over the course of my research, one from the very beginning with Dr. Jennifer Park, who some of you know very well, and who did her PhD with Dr. Martin at Seoul National University. And then a second very current study that's going on right now. So first I'll take you to study 1. And this was a co-autoethnography that Dr. Park and I conducted while we were doing our PhD studies. So we actually met, very, very grateful to Dr. Martin for having introduced me to Dr. Park. And we started a conversation. We were in the same place at a conference, and we started to explore our own roles. Co-autoethnography as a research approach allows us to give voice to our own personal experiences, but it allows us to contextualize these as we are exploring and building theory. Allows us to maintain our own individual perspectives and identities throughout the analytical process while we were searching for commonalities. And so Jennifer, Dr. Park, and I, we were both quote unquote migrants in our doctoral studies because we had both grown up in the United States and moved to different contexts. Dr. Park to Seoul and me to Luxembourg. And that was where we were doing our research studies. So we were both language learners. We were both teachers. We were both teacher professional developers, and we were both becoming researchers, but we wanted to explore our own perspectives. We asked research questions along the lines of, how am I positioned as a language learner and as a researcher in this context? How am I positioned within this new field? And what impact does my position as a language learner have on my identity as a science education researcher specifically, and in academia in general? We used a process that you see here of individually writing, coming together in discussion, analyzing our discussions, and then going back and writing again. And we did this over a few years. You see here, I think the one picture is dated 2014. Like, this was way back before we were using Zoom. We were still on Skype. And so this was our analytical approach. And what did we find out? May sound very self-evident, but we were quite shocked that first, we were often positioned as the other. We were outside of. We were strange because we were not from the context in which we were working. But we too conveyed deficit views of multilingualism, meaning we were positioned as not knowing, incompetent, that's my word, not Dr. Park's word, as people who were not quite yet up to the level that we should be, because we had migrated to a new context. About the process of co-autoethnography, the research itself was a mechanism for creating community for us on a more global level, but connected to our local contextual aspects. It helped us maintain a dialogue where we were positioned to look at the structures that supported marginalization in our new fields. Through the co-autoethnography, we had a mutually supportive space to be able to talk about what was happening and to be critical and reflective about our work as new people within academia. This was very important. Implications from this work, we think that this work helps us raise awareness for our own positionings that we as researchers bring with us into our work, and especially for us because we were moving into new communities. So it helped us to realize how I position myself or how I position others, which is essential because we know how important this is for teachers who are working with children and how our own positions impact how we teach. And so the big picture taking away from this, the process of reflection, discussion, and action is essential for us, we feel, as researchers and teacher educators. Okay, So I'm going to quickly go into the second study, which is going on now, which is the same theme. Again, looking at the individual, collective, and how we're informing one another. And here is the second project. This one is called Read Science with Me. I'll say it in Luxembourgish. Lies Wissenschaft mit mir. It's an examination of using children's books in science education in primary classrooms. And this is work that I'm doing with Dr. Christina Siri through the SciTeach Center. We're working with pre-service teachers in our Bachelor of Education program, and we're using the same structure of reflection, discussion, and action. We're looking at trade book use by teachers in different languages. So in German, in Luxembourgish, or in French for teaching science in classrooms. And this is involving bachelor students in observing when they go out into classrooms, reflecting on what they're seeing, and then asking, what do I want to do about this as a next step? We started during COVID time, which was interesting, and it's still ongoing. I'm happy to share that we have more funding, and so we're going to keep looking and keep talking. The process that we're using starts with reflection, then discussion, then action. And the reflection component, we ask our pre-service teachers together with us to think about, how did you use books? What are books for you? And how did they come into play in your education as a child? Now, go into classrooms and look around. And where are the books? How are they being used? May seem interesting to focus on something such as a book, but it's a material object that allows our teachers to really think about, how are these being used in this very super diverse context? And what do we want to do about that as professionals? Okay, whoops. After reflecting individually, we come together in discussion. And so that's us as teacher educators and researchers with our pre-service teachers. And then after several rounds of reflection and discussion, we come up with ways to develop resources for our teachers. Sometimes this is professional development. Sometimes this is simple as lists of books that can be integrated or used with a plan. And we even have one group that's developing a website to make more locally developed resources available for our teachers here freely and online. Okay, and what are we learning from this? Well, about the process itself. So about reflecting, discussion, and then action, it provides a space for critical reflection within our professionalization programs. And it serves to build relationships during this process. For us here in Luxembourg, and similar to what Dr. Martin was saying, we're having tremendous growth at the university. And so the number of students in our programs is exploding. Next year, our enrollment in individual courses is being upped by something like 200%. And so we need to completely restructure to go from classes of 20 to classes of 200. And so we see this as a way to maintain these relationships within these rapidly growing university contexts. And also it's a way of saying, let's look back at where we've come from in order to look forward and where we're heading. What are we learning about teaching practices? So here's where it gets interesting. The discrete national languages in school are still being upheld. So more recent theories about learning, such as translanguaging, that we know is happening outside of school, is not taking place within schools. It does not have a place in our national curriculum, and it's not occurring as much within classroom contexts. Our teachers are saying not much has changed since when they went to school. And they're asking the question, why is it this way? I'm actually going to end there because it's on that frustrating aspect that we tend to keep coming back to. But we're hoping that when we get to the point of saying, why is it we're teaching this way, will then prepare us to be able to take next steps together. Yeah, I'll leave it there. I'm going to skip that one because time is flying. And so just to finish up, So what is this critical examination of us and who we are as teachers and researchers in these multilingual contexts? Where has that brought us? Well, we see that this process of reflection, discussion, and action opens windows. It helps us to peek into our contexts and gives us space and time to really say, are we doing what we want to be doing and what is equitable and just and good for our students and the families that we work with? And so with that, I hope this gives you a little bit of a peek into some of the work we're doing, and I'm happy to answer questions or discuss further. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your presentation. And we can open for some comments and questions. I do want to confirm, Professor Song, Dr. Luff has not arrived, right? So we're at this point just time. We can talk, I guess, freely right now. The last presenter isn't here. Okay. If you have questions or comments, you can also leave them in the chat box. I have several, so I want to wait for anybody else who.
Okay, thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, and the local language. It's a you say Luxembourgish, but it's in local pronunciation. It's Luxembourgish. Luxembourgish. As I understand it, it's kind of a German dialect.
That is right. You have that perfectly stated. It is technically, linguistically classified as a Germanic dialect, is where it evolved from. But so its structure is very similar to the German dialect of the region right next to us.
Yeah.
But there is so much French that is integrated into it. So when you listen, it sounds like German and French with a twist.
Yes, yes. It's kind of I mean, as you wrote, Wissenschaft mit mir. It sounds like List Wissenschaft mit mir.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Effa is a German native speaker, so Effa is in, and hi, hi.
Hello.
So yes. So I mean, it's a very clear. The structure is it's almost identical with the German. So in the school, there's the language is not officially supported.
It only, I would say, through spoken means, but students are not schooled in writing Luxembourgish.
Yes,
So what you will see is as we write more and more Luxembourgish as a society, even in emails or in chats, there's often disagreement in what the correct way is, because it's still very much a spoken language versus a spoken and a written language.
I think this situation is similar to Switzerland and to Austria. Effa, she originally comes from Austria, so maybe we can learn more about more from her. But then I mean as a German major, I have a hard time understanding Swiss dialect and Austrian dialect. But then at schools only standard German is enforced. So the similar situation in Luxembourg.
Yes, and I think you use the word, you use the word enforce, which is interesting, because certainly outside of school, everything is being mixed and is fluid.
That's right.
Yeah.
I just had two quick comments. Your final slide, you talked about how the new teachers, by the way, it's shocking that you're expanding so much your teacher education program, when here in Korea, we are reducing. But the idea that teachers were saying not much has changed and they want to know why, but maybe that's changing. Maybe teachers didn't think about why or question it as much before. And so I think that that's actually really positive, that these young teachers, pre-service teachers, are asking these questions and maybe more aware of their own language, practices and with their friends and, things like that. So the translanguaging outside of classroom, how can we support that in the classroom? So I think maybe you have more positive, growth in the future, some more innovative sort of practices that can happen. And the second comment I wanted to make is that in Korea, the teachers are monolingual, much like our American counterparts. So, most of the teachers cannot support multiple languages in the classroom like the teachers in Luxembourg do, or could if they choose to. And I think that that's one of the really rich possibilities for your classrooms. But I think you have, like you said, a sort of pedagogical barrier and about what's appropriate in the classroom and such. So, yeah, but I look forward to talking to you more about the project. Yeah.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yay. Hi, Dr. Luff. So glad you can join us. We are eagerly awaiting